I stand in a dimly lit archive, surrounded by stacks of yellowed papers. As I carefully unfold a fragile letter, the faded ink reveals a desperate plea from another time. Dear President, it begins, I beg you to save my family from certain death. My hands tremble slightly as I read on, feeling the weight of history and human suffering in these simple words. These letters, thousands of them, tell a haunting story of Jewish refugees desperately seeking sanctuary from Nazi persecution in the late 1930s and early 1940s. But as I dig deeper into government files, the chilling truth emerges. Behind closed doors, U.S. officials weren't just overwhelmed, they were actively working to keep these refugees out. I pull out a memo from Breckinridge Long, the State Department's visa chief. His words make my blood run cold. We can delay and effectively stop for a temporary period of indefinite length the number of immigrants into the United States. This wasn't mere bureaucratic inefficiency. It was a calculated effort to deny sanctuary to those who needed it most. As I sift through more documents, a pattern becomes clear. Quota limits and financial tests were wielded like weapons, creating nearly insurmountable barriers. One refugee's heartbreaking letter reads, "We have sold everything, please. We can support ourselves, don't turn us away." But time and again, these genuine pleas were met with cold, legalistic rejections. I find myself haunted by the words of Ruth Gruber, an Auschwitz survivor who later spoke to reporters. She recounted how U.S. officials repeatedly claimed refugees would become a burden. It's a stark contrast to the desperation I see in these letters. Families willing to do anything, give up everything, just for a chance at safety. The more I uncover, the more my anger grows. How could a nation founded on principles of freedom and opportunity turn its back so callously? I think of my own family, of the times we've needed help. Would we have been labeled a burden too? As night falls in the archive, I'm left with a burning question. How did this refusal to help become entrenched political inertia? And more importantly, would I have the courage to fight a system that dismisses desperate pleas as mere inconveniences? I step out into the cool night air, my mind racing. The weight of these stories, these lives denied sanctuary, sits heavy on my shoulders. But there's work to be done. The past may be written, but the future, our response to those seeking refuge today, that's still in our hands. Dawn breaks as I return to the archive, determined to dig deeper. A newly declassified Treasury Department report confirms my worst suspicions. It lays bare a damning truth. High-level government obstruction deliberately sabotaged rescue efforts. I read passages aloud, my voice echoing in the empty room. Officials have not only failed to use the government machinery at their disposal to rescue Jews from Hitler, but have even gone so far as to use this government machinery to prevent the rescue of these Jews. My hands shake with a mixture of anger and disbelief. This wasn't just passive neglect, it was active suppression of life-saving measures. I think of the faces in those refugee photographs, of the desperate words in those letters. How many lives could have been saved if compassion had won out over fear and prejudice? I pull out more files, tracing the paper trail of obstructionism. Visa applications deliberately buried in red tape. Rescue ships turned away from American ports. Even when private organizations offered to cover all costs for refugees, they were stonewalled at every turn. As I piece together this dark chapter of history, I can't help but draw parallels to modern times. Today's headlines about asylum seekers and immigration debates take on a haunting new context. Have we truly learned from the past, or are we at risk of repeating these same cruel mistakes? I find myself staring at a photo of children huddled on a ship, turned away from safety. Their eyes seem to look right through me, asking a silent question. What will you do differently? The weight of this knowledge is almost unbearable, but I know that uncovering the truth, no matter how painful, is the first step toward change. As I carefully refile these documents, I make a silent promise to those faces from the past. Their stories will not be forgotten. Their suffering will not be in vain. I step out of the archive into the bright afternoon sun. The world seems different now, charged with both the weight of history and the urgency of the present. I think of the refugee crises unfolding across the globe today. Will we choose compassion this time? Or will we once again let rules override our humanity? As I walk down the street, my mind races with questions. How do we balance national security with our moral obligation to help those fleeing persecution? What role does fear play in shaping immigration policy? And most importantly, how can we ensure that the voices of the vulnerable are truly heard? I find myself in a park, watching families enjoy a peaceful afternoon. Children laugh and play, reminding me of all that was lost when we turned our backs on those seeking refuge decades ago. But they also represent hope, a chance to do better, to be better. My research has shown me the dark depths of human indifference, but it's also revealed incredible acts of courage. Diplomats who defied orders to issue visas, ordinary citizens who risked everything to hide and protect refugees. These stories remind me that, even in the darkest times, there are always those who choose to stand up for what's right. As the sun begins to set, I make a decision. This story, the story of refugees denied sanctuary and the bureaucratic cruelty that sealed their fate, needs to be told, not just as a historical lesson, but as an urgent call to action for today. I pull out my notebook and begin to write. The words flow easily now, fueled by everything I've uncovered, and the burning need to make sure these voices are finally heard. I write of the heart-wrenching letters, the cold government memos, the lives needlessly lost. But I also write of hope, of the power we have to choose a different path. As darkness falls, I look up at the stars. I think of all those who once gazed at these same stars, dreaming of safety and a new beginning. Their dreams may have been crushed by quotas and callous policies, but their story isn't over. It lives on as a challenge to us all. Will we have the courage to confront our own prejudices, to push back against fear-mongering and see the humanity in those seeking refuge, to demand that our leaders choose compassion over political expediency? I close my notebook, filled with a new sense of purpose. The past cannot be changed, but the future is still unwritten, and armed with the truth of history, we have the power to ensure that this time, when desperate pleas for help reach our shores, we answer with open arms and open hearts. As I walk home through the quiet streets, I make a silent vow to never stop asking the hard questions, to never turn away from uncomfortable truths, and to always fight for a world where no one in need is ever again labeled a burden. The story of Jewish refugees and America's failure is not just a chapter in history books. It's a mirror held up to our present, challenging us to do better, to be better. And as I reach my front door, I know that my work, our work, is only just beginning. In 1944, a bombshell dropped on Washington. Not a physical explosion, but a document that shook the foundations of American policy. The Treasury Department had uncovered a dark secret one that would expose the true nature of the U.S. government's response to the plight of Jewish refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. As the camera pans across weathered pages, we see the damning words, "Report to the Secretary on the acquiescence of this government in the murder of the Jews." This wasn't just another bureaucratic memo. It was an indictment, accusing the State Department of not just inaction, but active obstruction in the face of a humanitarian crisis. The report laid bare a chilling truth. Government officials had used the machinery of government to prevent the rescue of these Jews. It wasn't ignorance that led to thousands being turned away at America's shores. It was policy. As we zoom in on a particularly damning line, the narrator's voice grows heavy with the weight of history. They have not only failed to use the governmental machinery at their disposal to rescue Jews from Hitler, but have even gone so far as to use this government machinery to prevent the rescue of these Jews. The implications were staggering. While millions faced extermination in Europe, bureaucrats in Washington were deliberately slowing the process, using every tool at their disposal to keep refugees out. Quota laws, visa restrictions, even the manipulation of public opinion, all were weaponized against those seeking sanctuary. One internal memo, now highlighted on screen, reveals the cold calculation behind these actions. We can delay and effectively stop for a temporary period of indefinite length the number of immigrants into the United States. We could do this by simply advising our consuls to put every obstacle in the way. As the camera pulls back, we see stacks of letters, desperate pleas from those trapped in Europe. One voice rises above the rest, reading aloud, "I beg you, help us to leave this hell. We have nowhere else to turn." The contrast between these heart-wrenching appeals and the clinical language of government obstruction is stark. The Treasury report was dubbed political dynamite, and with good reason. It forced President Roosevelt's hand, leading to the creation of the War Refugee Board. But for many, this action came too late. The delay had already cost countless lives. As we transition to modern footage, the narrator poses a haunting question. Can one government report change a nation's moral direction? And the scene shifts, and we find ourselves in the present day. The colors are softer now, but the echoes of the past remain. We see modern refugees, their faces etched with the same desperation that haunted their predecessors decades ago. A montage of headlines flashes across the screen. New visa restrictions announced. Asylum seekers turned away at border. Public charge roll tightened. The parallels are unmistakable. An expert appears on screen. Her voice measured but urgent. History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. The tools of bureaucracy can still be wielded to obstruct humanitarian efforts, just as they were in the 1940s. We return to the Treasury report, now preserved in a museum. The camera lingers on a particularly poignant passage. Unless remedial action is taken immediately, this government will have to share for all time responsibility for this extermination. The narrator's voice takes on a reflective tone. The power of documents to expose truth remains as vital today as it was then. But exposure alone is not enough. It's what we do with that knowledge that defines us. As we near the end of our journey, we see a series of faces, refugees past and present, government officials, ordinary citizens. Each looks directly into the camera, challenging us to confront our own role in this ongoing story. The final scene returns us to those stacks of letters from the 1940s. As the camera slowly pans across them, we hear a chorus of voices, some from the past, some from the present, all pleading for help, for sanctuary, for compassion. The narrator's voice rises one last time. Rules can override compassion, but only if we let them. The choice, as it was then, remains ours. As the screen fades to black, a final question appears. What will future generations say about the choices we make today? The music swells, then fades, leaving us with the weight of history and the responsibility of the present. The year is 1939. A desperate letter arrives at the U.S. State Department, its pages stained with tears and hope. "Please, I beg you," writes a Jewish father from Berlin, "save my children from the Nazi terror." His words echo thousands more, each a cry for help from the abyss of persecution. But these pleas fall on deaf ears. In the halls of power, a different conversation unfolds. "We can delay and effectively stop for a temporary period of indefinite length," writes a State Department official, discussing ways to obstruct Jewish immigration. The contrast is stark, chilling. Human desperation met with cold bureaucracy. This is the story of how rules became weapons, how paperwork became a death sentence. It's a tale of two worlds colliding, refugees fleeing for their lives, and a government choosing inaction in the face of genocide. Let's step back in time. The streets of Europe are aflame with hatred. Jewish families, once pillars of their communities, now find themselves stripped of rights, dignity, and soon, their very lives. They turn to America, the beacon of hope, the land of the free. But what they encounter is a wall of red tape, a labyrinth of quotas and regulations designed to keep them out. We see a young woman, eyes bright with determination, writing to her American relatives. "I have skills," she insists. "I can contribute. Please, help me come to safety." Her letter joins thousands more, piling up on desks, gathering dust as the clock ticks away precious seconds of life. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., memos circulate. The visa requirements could be enforced in such a way as to postpone the granting of the visas. One official suggests. It's a masterclass in bureaucratic obstruction, a way to say no without ever uttering the word. But why? Why would a nation founded on principles of freedom turn its back on those most in need? The answers are complex, rooted in fear, prejudice, and a misguided notion of national interest. America First becomes a rallying cry, used to justify closing doors and hearts. As we delve deeper into government archives, a damning picture emerges. The Treasury Department, led by Henry Morgenthau Jr., launches an investigation. What they uncover is shocking, a deliberate policy of obstruction, of willful neglect in the face of humanitarian crisis. Morgenthau's report is scathing. "It is a shocking fact," he writes, "that these officials have not only failed to use the governmental machinery at their disposal to rescue Jews from Hitler, but have even gone so far as to use this machinery to prevent rescue. The evidence is overwhelming. Visa applications deliberately delayed, rescue plans sabotaged, lives that could have been saved lost to the gas chambers and firing squads of Nazi Europe." But this isn't just a story of the past. As we transition to modern times, the colors on our screen shifting from muted sepia to soft, present-day hues, we see echoes of this dark chapter playing out again. In 1948, with the horrors of the Holocaust still fresh, America passes the Displaced Persons Act. It's meant to open doors, to right the wrongs of the past. But even here, prejudice finds a way. The law favors Aryan refugees, continuing to discriminate against the very Jewish survivors it was meant to help. Fast forward to today, we see Syrian families fleeing civil war, Central American children escaping gang violence, and once again, We hear the familiar refrain, "We can't take them all. They'll be a burden. They don't belong here." Public charge rules, once used to block Jewish refugees, are dusted off and repurposed. The language may have changed, but the intent remains the same: to keep out those deemed undesirable. Jewish clergy, keenly aware of this historical parallel, raise their voices in warning. Law can be a source of cruelty, they remind us, echoing lessons learned in the darkest days of the Holocaust. When rules replace compassion, when bureaucracy overrides humanity, we all lose a piece of our soul. These letters, these memos, they're not just historical artifacts, they're warnings, etched in ink and tears, of what happens when we prioritize procedure over people, when we let fear guide our policies, when we turn away from the desperate pleas of those in need. So we must ask ourselves, when will we learn? How many more lives must be lost before we realize that our shared humanity is more important than any quota or regulation? As we pan across faces, past and present, of those seeking refuge, we're confronted with a simple truth. These are not just numbers on a page or problems to be solved. They are human beings, each with hopes, dreams, and the fundamental right to live in safety and dignity. The strings swell, tension building as we face our final question. When the next crisis comes, and it will come, how will we respond? Will we hide behind rules and regulations? Or will we find the courage to act with compassion and moral clarity? The choice is ours. The lessons of history are clear. Rules can override compassion, but only if we let them. We have the power to choose differently, to write a new chapter where humanity triumphs over bureaucracy. As the music fades and the screen dims, we're left with a challenge. How do we draw the line between law and living up to our humanity? It's a question that echoes through time. From the desperate letters of 1939 to the refugee crises of today, the answer lies not in some dusty government office, but in our hearts, in our willingness to see the face of our own families and those seeking sanctuary, in our courage to stand up and say, "Never again," and mean it. This isn't just history, it's a call to action, a reminder that in the face of injustice, silence is complicity, that when we turn away from those in need, we diminish not just their humanity, but our own. So as we close this chapter, let's open our hearts. Let's learn from the past to build a more compassionate future, because in the end, the true measure of our society isn't found in the laws we write, but in the lives we choose to save.